The Elder's Memory. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Academy's courtyard as Elder Korvac made his way to his favorite stone bench. His scales absorbed the warmth, bringing a slight comfort to his aging joints. At 100 cycles old, he found himself increasingly drawn to this quiet corner of the Academy grounds, where the towering statue of a human stood sentinel over the carefully maintained gardens. The statue had been his idea, 60 cycles ago, when the Great Council debated how to commemorate humanity's role in their people's survival. Some had argued for a simple plaque, others for an entire museum. But Korvac had insisted on something more visible, more permanent. Something that would make future generations ask questions. He traced the familiar patterns of wear on the bench with his claws, remembering the day they unveiled the statue. The human figure stood 7 units tall, precise to the last detail, from the strange cloth coverings they wore to the determined set of their facial features. The plaque at its base read simply, "To those who answered our call." The distant sound of chattering students drew him from his reverie. His heart quickened slightly at the familiar noise. Today's lesson would be special. As the Academy's senior history professor, he had taught this particular class countless times, but it never failed to move him. To most of his students, it was ancient history, events that happened long before their eggs had even been laid. But to Korvac, it was memory, still vivid and alive in both his hearts. "Come in and take your seats, hatchlings," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. 30 young Quan filed into the outdoor learning space, their scales still bright with youth, none of them more than 10 cycles old. Their excitement was palpable, creating a cacophony of chirps and whistles that would have irritated younger teachers. But Korvac remembered his own childhood, how different it had been, and preferred their joyful noise to the fearful silence of his youth. "Quiet down now," he said, fixing them with a stern but gentle gaze. "Today's lesson is special. We're gathered here at one of our people's most sacred monuments." He gestured to the statue looming above them. "Who can tell me what this statue depicts?" A student from the back row, Quack, raised his claw. "It's a human, Honor Elder." "Very good, Quack," Korvac nodded approvingly. "And who can tell me about the humans?" Another student, Rock, stood confidently. "They are aliens, but my sire calls them just a myth, a legend." Korvac surveyed the class. "How many of you agree that humans are just a myth?" Almost every claw shot up, bringing a sad shake of his head. Less than 90 cycles for real events to become myth. It pained him to see how quickly truth could fade. "That is incorrect," he said firmly. "Your sire is wrong, Rock." He turned to face the statue, his voice taking on a reverent tone. "I was there when the humans appeared to us. When they saved us." An excited buzz ran through the class. Several students spoke at once. "Really? Were humans as tall as the statue? Where are they now? Did you meet any?" Korvac held up a claw for silence. "Yes, I was there when the humans came." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I wasn't much older than you are now when we still lived on Quen." Another excited murmur rippled through the class at the mention of their former homeworld. To these young ones, Quen was almost mythical itself, a place of legend rather than their species' cradle. Sometimes it worried Korvac how few Quan remained who remembered their original home. He continued, "There was no Quan Republic then. We had only recently reached for the stars, establishing a few colonies on our moons. We couldn't even explore our entire system yet." Pride crept into his voice as he added, "My sire was a member of the ruling council of elders." The students leaned forward, entranced. Korvac knew this part of the story well, how they had sent messages into space, wondering if they were alone. Their first contact with the Chians, who introduced them to the larger galactic community. Small delegations of various species came to trade and welcome them, including the humans. Unlike most aliens, Korvac explained, the humans were fair in their dealings with us. It was one of their laws when interacting with races new to the stars. He described their early trades for technology, including new tools for exploring and examining their system. His voice grew grave as he reached the critical part of the story. It was one of these new devices that warned us of the danger building inside our second moon, Bazak. The class fell silent, sensing the weight of what was to come. Korvac continued, pressure was building to catastrophic levels. At first, we thought it would only endanger our science outpost there. We didn't think big enough. He paused, letting the tension build. We didn't realize it would crack our moon and send chunks of it hurtling toward our homeworld. He described how their scientists had studied the changes, watching helplessly as fault lines widened and moonquakes grew more frequent and intense. When we finally understood the true scope of the danger, we knew we needed help. Our civilization was still young to space travel. We had few ships capable of leaving our system. Korvac's scales dulled slightly as he recalled the desperate messages sent to every race they'd met. Most ignored us. Some offered to sell or rent their ships at impossible prices. A few offered shelter, but at the cost of our freedom. His voice hardened. The KZ-Nit wanted to make us slaves in exchange for sanctuary. The young Quan shifted uncomfortably, trying to imagine such a desperate situation. Korvac continued, we had almost given up hope of help from other races. We were making plans to save as many as we could with our limited resources. He smiled slightly, knowing what came next. We had no idea that someone had answered our call. The story continued, describing the arrival of the human fleet, thousands of ships of all sizes and purposes, from massive warships to nimble shuttles. They apologized for taking so long to reach us, Korvac said, still amazed after all these cycles. One of your classmates, Maya, actually calculated how long it took them to travel from their home system to Quen. They had launched their rescue fleet less than one rotation after receiving our message. As the first part of his tale drew to a close, Korvac looked at his students' faces, seeing the same wonder he had felt as a young hatchling watching the human ships fill their skies. He knew the next parts of the story would amaze them even more, the incredible efficiency of the evacuation, the gift of a new home, and the mysterious departure of humanity that had led to their current status as legend. But that would wait for another day. For now, he wanted them to sit with this first revelation, that sometimes, help comes from unexpected places, and that kindness can cross the barriers of species and space. The Great Exodus. The next day, Korvac's students gathered earlier than usual, eager to hear the continuation of his tale. The morning air was crisp, and the statue's shadow stretched across the courtyard like a protective hand over the young Quan. Yesterday, I told you about the humans' arrival, Korvac began, his scales shifting to a deeper shade of blue as he recalled the memories. Today, I'll tell you about the evacuation itself, a feat that still amazes me after all these cycles. He described how the humans had arrived with a fully formed plan, as if they had been preparing for this exact scenario their entire lives. Their ships carried everything we could possibly need, not just space for our people, but specialized containers for our plants, animals, and even samples of our soil and atmosphere. The students listened, spellbound, as Korvac detailed the incredible efficiency of the human operation. They had studied our biology, our social structure, even our architecture. They knew exactly how many of our people could fit on each ship while maintaining our family units and social bonds. He explained how the humans had divided their fleet into specialized teams. The science vessels collected samples of every plant and animal species they could find. The engineering ships dismantled our most important structures, temples, factories, schools, preserving them piece by piece for reconstruction on our new home. One student, Lyra, raised her claw. Honor Elder, why did they take apart the buildings? Couldn't we just build new ones? Korvac nodded approvingly at the question. The humans understood something about us that we had barely recognized ourselves. Our connection to our past is written in our architecture. Each building tells a story, carries memories and meaning. They didn't want us to lose that. He described the massive cargo ships that had descended to extract resources from their world, metals, minerals, and even water. The humans knew we would need these materials to rebuild, and they wanted us to have pieces of our homeworld with us. The most impressive part, Korvac explained, was how the humans handled the wildlife preservation. They didn't just take a few specimens of each species. They created entire ecological systems within their ships, preserving not just individual creatures but the complex web of life that sustained them. He told them about the specialized teams of human xenobiologists who work tirelessly to understand and maintain these artificial environments. Every creature you see in our wildlife preserves today, from the smallest insect to the largest predator, is here because the humans understood that a civilization isn't just its people, but all the life that evolved alongside them. The scale of the operation had been mind-boggling. They worked without rest for 10 rotations, Korvac said. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, like a great dance in the sky. Some were landing while others took off, each one filled with a piece of our world. He described how the humans had even thought to preserve their culture. They brought devices to record our stories, our songs, our histories. They documented everything they could about our way of life, knowing that in times of great change, it's easy for these things to be lost. The evacuation hadn't been without its challenges, though. Korvac told them about the resistance some had shown to leaving their homes, and how the humans had handled it with remarkable patience and understanding. They never forced anyone to leave, he explained. Instead, they showed us detailed projections of what would happen when the moon broke apart. They helped us understand that leaving wasn't just about survival, it was about preserving our entire civilization for future generations. As the danger from their moon grew more immediate, the humans had increased their efforts. The final days were the most intense, Korvac remembered. The ground shook constantly as Bazak began to break apart. The sky was filled with ships, and the air buzzed with the sound of their engines. He described the last night on Quen, how the humans had organized a ceremony to help their people say goodbye to their homeworld. They understood our need for closure, for one last moment to honor the planet that had given us life. The students sat in respectful silence as Korvac described watching their world. But even in that moment of loss, the humans had given them hope. They showed us images of our new home, Korvac said, his voice brightening. A world they had been preparing for us, one that would become known as New Quen. As he concluded the second part of his tale, Korvac looked at his students with pride. Remember this, young ones, the humans didn't just save our lives. They saved everything that made us who we are. They understood that to truly save a civilization, you must preserve its heart and soul, not just its people. The sun had risen high in the sky, and Korvac knew it was time to end the day's lesson. Tomorrow, he promised, I'll tell you about our arrival at New Quen, and the even greater surprise that awaited us there. The students departed slowly, many of them looking back at the statue with new understanding in their eyes. Korvac remained on his bench, remembering the sight of those massive human ships against the stars, and the way they had changed his people's destiny forever. New beginnings. The third day dawned with a light rain, but Korvac's students still gathered eagerly beneath the covered portion of the courtyard. The water made the statue gleam, and several students commented on how lifelike it looked in the morning light. Today, Korvac began, I'll tell you about our arrival at New Quen, and how the humans had prepared for our coming in ways we could never have imagined. He described the journey through space, how the human ships had maintained perfect formation despite traveling at speeds that seemed impossible to the Quan. They had created temporary communities within their ships, he explained. Each vessel was like a small city, with areas for families to live together, spaces for communal gatherings, and even small gardens to provide fresh food. The humans had used the journey time to prepare the Quan for their new home. They taught us about the planet they had chosen, Korvac said. They showed us detailed maps and climate data, explained the differences we would need to adapt to, and helped us plan how to build our new civilization. What amazed Korvac most, even now, was how the humans had anticipated their psychological needs. They understood that we were grieving for our lost world, he explained. They had specialists among them, people trained in helping others cope with loss and change. They taught us techniques for dealing with our grief while maintaining hope for the future. The journey had taken nearly half a rotation, but finally, they had arrived at their destination. I'll never forget the moment we first saw New Quen, Korvac said, his scales rippling with emotion. It was beautiful, blue oceans, green and purple vegetation, white clouds swirling in its atmosphere. Different from our homeworld, yet somehow perfect for us. But the real surprise had come when they began their descent. We expected to find an empty world that we would need to terraform, Korvac explained. Instead, we found that another human fleet had already been there for months, preparing everything for our arrival. He described the temporary shelters that had already been constructed, enough to house their entire population comfortably. They had analyzed our architectural styles and adapted them to the local. Unexpected guardians. On the fourth day of his lessons, Korvac gathered his students in the early morning hours, when both of New Quen's moons were still visible in the sky. The statue's shadow seemed particularly long today, stretching across the courtyard like a bridge between past and present. Today, Korvac began, his voice carrying a note of solemnity, I will tell you about what happened after we settled on New Quen, and why the humans are no longer with us. The students leaned forward, their scales shifting with anticipation. This was the part of the story that had never been fully told, the mystery that had helped transform humans from historical figures into legends. After helping us establish our initial settlements, Korvac continued, the humans didn't leave immediately as many expected. Instead, they stayed to protect us during our most vulnerable period of transition. He described how the human fleet had positioned itself throughout their new star system, creating a defensive network that would detect any approaching vessels. They knew that our displacement would attract attention, he explained. Other species might see us as easy prey, weakened by our relocation. Their concerns proved justified. Within the first cycle of settlement, 3 different alien species attempted to establish trade relations with the newly relocated Quan. The students listened intently as Korvac described how the humans had handled each situation. The first were the KZ-Nit, he said, noting how several students hissed at the name. They claimed they were coming to offer humanitarian aid. The humans intercepted their fleet before they could reach orbit. We later learned that the KZ-Nit ships were carrying weapons and slave collars. The second attempt came from a species called the Vorith, who tried a more subtle approach. They sent a single diplomatic vessel, Korvac explained, but the human scans detected a cloaked fleet hiding in the system's asteroid belt. When confronted, the Vorith claimed it was a cultural misunderstanding. But it was the third incident that truly demonstrated humanity's commitment to protecting the Quan. A coalition of opportunistic species had assembled a substantial fleet, believing their combined forces could overwhelm the human defenders. That day, Korvac said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we witnessed why humans were both respected and feared throughout the galaxy. Their ships moved with impossible precision, their weapons displayed power beyond anything we'd ever seen. They defeated a fleet 3 times their size without losing a single vessel. The humans had transmitted the entire battle to the Quan settlement, ensuring that word of their protective capabilities would spread throughout the galaxy. After that, no species dared to threaten the recovering civilization. But the humans did more than just protect them from external threats. They helped the Quan establish their own defensive capabilities, teaching them advanced shipbuilding techniques and weapons technology. They didn't want us to remain dependent on them, Korvac explained. They wanted us to be able to protect ourselves. Perhaps most importantly, the humans helped the Quan establish diplomatic relations with trustworthy species in the galaxy. They introduced us to allies we could rely on, Korvac said. Species who had also been helped by humanity in their times of need. The students were fascinated to learn about this network of human-assisted civilizations. It was like discovering we had siblings scattered across the galaxy, Korvac explained. Other species who understood what it meant to be saved by humanity. As the Quan civilization stabilized and grew stronger, the humans began to prepare for their departure. But before they left, they shared something extraordinary with the Quan leadership. They showed us records of their own history, Korvac said, his voice filled with wonder. Long ago, when humans were still confined to their own world, they had faced countless disasters, natural and self-inflicted. Each time, they had survived through cooperation and determination. They had made a promise to themselves: once they reached the stars, they would ensure no other species had to face extinction alone. The humans had established outposts throughout the galaxy, monitoring developing civilizations for signs of impending disasters. They had saved dozens of species, always operating in the same way, arriving suddenly with overwhelming force and capability, helping restore and protect the civilization, and then departing once their work was done. But why did they leave? Asked a student named Trill, voicing the question that had puzzled generations of Quan. Korvac's scales shifted to a deep blue of remembrance. They told us that their role was to help civilizations survive their darkest moments, not to guide their development. They believed that each species must find its own path among the stars. He described the departure ceremony, how the massive human fleet had assembled one final time above New Quen. Their ships created patterns of light in our sky, a farewell display that lasted for hours. And then, they simply vanished, jumping to somewhere beyond our knowledge. The humans left behind only a few things: the technology they had promised, the alliances they had helped forge, and a single message carved in both human and Quan script on a monolith in the capital city: remember your strength. Remember your resilience. Remember that in your darkest hour, you were not alone. That message, Korvac concluded, is why this statue stands here today. Not just to remember those who saved us, but to remind us of our own capacity to survive and thrive, even in the face of extinction. As the day's lesson drew to a close, the students looked at the statue with new understanding. It wasn't just a monument to their saviors, it was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the vastness of space, compassion could bridge the gulf between stars. Legacy of the Stars. On the final day of his lessons, Korvac met his students not at the statue, but in the Academy's observatory. The massive dome opened to the stars above, and the advanced telescopes, built using human designs, could peer deep into the galaxy. Today, Korvac said, as the students settled into their places, I will tell you about humanity's legacy, and what we learned about them after they left. He activated the observatory's main display, showing a map of the galaxy. Dozens of points of light flickered across its surface, each representing a civilization that had been touched by humanity. In the cycles since the humans departed, Korvac explained, we discovered we weren't alone in our experience. Through diplomatic channels and interstellar communications, we made contact with other species who had similar stories. He told them about the Zephyrians, whose star had begun to die centuries before its time. The humans had arrived with technology to stabilize it, teaching them how to maintain the stellar engineering devices before departing. He spoke of the nautiloids, an aquatic species whose ocean world had been threatened by a massive comet. The humans had not only diverted the comet but had helped the nautiloids develop space travel capabilities, allowing them to explore beyond their watery home. Each story was different, Korvac said, but they all shared common elements: humanity's sudden appearance, their incredible preparation, their effective assistance, and their mysterious departure once their work was done. Through these shared experiences, a network of civilizations had formed, species bound together not by treaties or trade agreements, but by the common experience of having been saved by humanity. They called themselves the Preserved, and they tried to live up to the example humanity had set. When the Lyrans faced a devastating plague, Korvac explained, it was the combined medical knowledge of the Preserved that helped them survive. When the crystalline collective's homeworld was shattered by tectonic activity, we were among the first to offer them sanctuary. But perhaps the most intriguing discovery came from their combined astronomical observations. The students leaned forward as Korvac manipulated the observatory's controls, zooming in on various sectors of space. We began to notice patterns, he said. Areas of space where stars seemed to shift in unusual ways. Regions where energy readings didn't quite match what we expected. And most intriguingly, signs of massive engineering projects at the edges of known space. These observations led to a stunning theory: the humans hadn't simply disappeared, they were still out there, working on an even grander scale. Some believed they were constructing vast networks of habitable worlds, preparing for future disasters. Others thought they were building defenses against threats from beyond the galaxy. But we may never know for certain, Korvac said. Perhaps that's part of their gift to us. The mystery keeps us looking to the stars, wondering and exploring. He told them about the Quan's own efforts to continue humanity's legacy. We maintain watching stations throughout our sector of space, monitoring developing civilizations for signs of trouble. We've even had the honor of helping a few young species survive their own challenges. The students were amazed to learn that the Quan themselves had participated in rescue missions. Yes, Korvac confirmed, we've helped evacuate worlds, stabilize atmospheres, and defend vulnerable species. Each time, we try to follow humanity's example, to help without controlling, to protect without dominating. As the lesson drew to a close, Korvac had one final revelation for his students. The statue in our courtyard isn't just a monument to the past, he said. It's a reminder of our responsibility to the future. The humans showed us that advanced civilization isn't about power or conquest, it's about using our knowledge and capabilities to help others survive and thrive. He directed their attention to a particular star in the observatory's display. 3 cycles ago, our monitoring stations detected unusual seismic activity on a planet orbiting that star. The civilization there is just beginning to explore space travel. They don't know it yet, but they're about to face a crisis that could end their world. The students watched in amazement as Korvac brought up images of ships being prepared in the Quan shipyards. In 2 rotations, we will launch our own rescue fleet. We've been preparing for months, studying their biology, their culture, their needs. We will help them as we were helped. But Honor Elder, one student asked, won't they see us as mythical beings, just as some see the humans now? Korvac's scales rippled with amusement. Perhaps they will. And perhaps that's as it should be. After all, myths aren't just stories, they're lessons, passed down through generations, teaching us how to face our greatest challenges with courage and compassion. As the stars wheeled overhead, Korvac led his students back to the courtyard, where the statue stood in the gathering dusk. Remember, he said, the humans didn't just save our species, they showed us who we could become. They proved that the true measure of a civilization isn't its power to destroy, but its willingness to preserve and protect. The students lingered longer than usual that evening, looking up at the statue with new eyes. They understood now that they weren't just learning about history, they were part of an ongoing story, a legacy that stretched across the stars and into the future. And somewhere out there, Korvac knew, humanity was still watching, still working, still helping those in need. The myth had become reality, and the reality had become something even greater, a promise passed from species to species, a chain of compassion linking the stars themselves. The circle completes. Korvac stood before the massive viewport of the Quan flagship, Remembrance, his aged scales reflecting the starlight. Around him, a fleet of rescue ships prepared for their jump to hyperspace. The massive vessels, built using designs inspired by human technology, carried everything needed to save the Axillari, a young civilization facing imminent planetary destruction. Honor Elder, his great-granddaughter Lyra approached, now a fleet commander. The final simulations are complete. We're ready. Korvac nodded, remembering that day 90 cycles ago when human ships had filled Quen's skies. Now, it was their turn. The Quan fleet carried prefabricated shelters, environmental systems, and enough supplies to relocate an entire civilization. They had spent months studying Axillari culture, biology, and social structures, just as the humans had done for them. Have you informed them we're coming? Korvac asked. No, Lyra replied with a slight smile. We're following the human protocol. Sometimes hope arrives better unannounced. As the fleet prepared for jump, their sensors detected something unusual. A massive energy signature appeared at the edge of their detection range, unlike anything they'd ever encountered. For a brief moment, their instruments recorded a fleet of ships, larger and more advanced than any they'd seen before, watching them from the darkness between stars. The unknown ships transmitted a single message before vanishing. When translated, it contained just 3 words in ancient human script. The circle continues. Korvac's scales rippled with emotion as he understood. The humans had never truly left. They had been watching, waiting to see their lessons passed on. As the Quan fleet jumped toward their mission of mercy, Korvac finally understood the true gift humanity had given them, not just survival, but purpose. Signal the fleet, he commanded. Operation Legacy begins now. As the ships accelerated to faster-than-light speed, Korvac thought of that statue back at the academy. Tomorrow, another instructor would tell young Quan about the myth of humanity. But now the story would have a new chapter, how the saved had become the saviors. The stars streaked past like rivers of light, carrying them toward their destiny. Somewhere out there, humanity was still watching, still helping, still guiding young civilizations toward a future where no species faced extinction alone. And now, the Quan were part of that grand mission, adding their own chapter to the endless story written in the stars. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace above the Axillari homeworld, Korvac saw their future unfold before him. They would save this species, teach them, protect them, and eventually watch them join the great chain of civilizations linked by compassion and hope. The myth of humanity wasn't just a story anymore. It was a legacy, passed from star to star, from species to species, reaching endlessly into the future. And as Korvac gave the order to begin the rescue operation, he whispered the words that now adorned every Quan rescue vessel. Remember your strength. Remember your resilience. Remember that in your darkest hour, you were not alone. The great circle was complete, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity smiled, last edited just now.